Greetings. Today I'm going to be talking about a woman from the 20th century, quite a leap from the other women that I've talked about. Her name was Bouena Sarfatty, actually Bouena Sarfatty Garfinkel, but we'll keep her in the Sephardi name of Bouena Sarfatty. And I called her a survivor, poet slash historian and recorder of a lost community. Bouena Sarfatty ended her life in Montreal, but we will follow her from Salonika, which was the community that she was born in and was tied to very, very strongly. I met Bouena Sarfatty, and I found her by chance. I was doing a research on Sephardi community and looking for a particular family, and wrote to Sephardi communities all over the world and asked if they knew of this family. And she wrote me a lovely letter in French, which was the language that she felt very comfortable writing in. I have here, I can give you samples of her own writing. Bouena was also, she knew Greek and she knew Ladino or Judeo-Spanish, which was her native tongue. And when I met her, she gave me 200 pages of coplas. Coplas are poems of sorts. They actually were rabbinic poems in the earlier period and then later became popular. And she had written two very large groups of coplas, one about life in Salonika in the 20th century. And you can see that she starts with Bouena Sarfatty. She puts her name on there, and Salonique she writes in French because she mixes French with her Ladino, with her Judeo-Spanish quite a lot. At any rate, she gave me these coplas that describe life in Salonika, and she gave me coplas that also described the German takeover in 1940s and what life was like then. And here she called it the miseries inflicted by the Germans. This is the first page of the coplas about the miseries inflicted by the Germans, and there are quite a few. I translated all of them, and I will be showing you some of the translations there. Here's the letter in French, the original letter that she wrote to me, que c'est cher Docteur Melammed. And then she starts to tell me how she received my letter and who this family that I was looking for, which was not her family, the Botons, and how she knew. As I said, I'm going to show you some samples of coplas to see what kind of approach that she took. And she opens up with the German coming into Salonika. It is Passover. There are rumors that the Germans are at the entrance to Salonika. Everyone closed their shops and quickly came home. After an hour, one could hear the breaking of doors of food and beverage stores. God spare us from such misery. She used the word for illness, the hasenura, but misery really would be much more appropriate. So this was actually the very first copla in the collection about the miseries that were created by the Nazis. She really describes it from A to Z. She was a very active member of the Sephardic community, a family that could trace their heritage back to Spain. And she herself was extremely active, especially in general, but once the Germans came in, she initiated many activities. She was she was affiliated with the Red Cross, and when she knew that there was shortage, for example, of food and whatnot, then she went to the building of Matanat Evyonim, where you help the poor, and she would prepare she would prepare powdered milk for the mothers with children, and worked with the Red Cross. So you can see this here. She's talking about individual people. She goes from talking about the community to talking about individual people, and I will try to weave through some of the problems and challenges that she had to face, and some of the major obstacles that she had to face while she was watching what was going on and trying to see what there was. Here we've got I won't go into the history at the time, but basically, the Greeks had sent their army out to fight the Italians, and since they were about to win, that is when Hitler decided he had to come in to Greece and save face for his allies, which is why they came into the north. They came into Salonika, is up in the north, and so there are soldiers there. There are Jewish soldiers in the Greek army. And there are prisoners, there are those who are taken prisoners and whatnot. So we can see here, she goes, Samueliko, the son of Antona, we do not know what happened to him. He was serving as a soldier since 1940 in Veria. Today we got a letter from the Red Cross stating that he was a captive and in good health. We hope he is going to stay in Italy until the Germans are going to be sunk. Let us drink to the health of all the soldiers whose whereabouts we do not know. So this is where she's trying to figure out what is going on with the various Jewish soldiers. One of them was her fiance, who had also been sent out to fight, and he does return to Salonika, but I will in a minute relate what happened to him. Here we've got, and you notice at the end of each copla, she says, Bebamos a la salud de, let us drink to the health of, and most of the time she puts in the name, someone's name in. Actually, it's very interesting because I collected all the names that she came up with, and you can see that she knew the community so well. And survivors afterwards wrote to me because they said, our family appears in these poems, and they were very moved by it. Here she says the Germans took possession of Salonika. They gathered the Salonican Jews at the plaza and forced them to do exercises until they were exhausted, and so they began to collapse. Let us drink to the health of Ashira Barvanel. Here we have, and when I was looking at my notes, I realized how ironic this was, but they had sent out a notice that all of the work age Salonican Jewish men were to come to this plaza, and many of them did not show. Matter of fact, a very small percentage showed up. The Nazis were absolutely furious, and they exhausted them and beat some of them, and then basically told them, go home, and if you don't come back with the right number of men that we want to send out to work units, we're going to start shooting you. And this was called the Black Sabbath there, the Shabbat HaShchora, which of course echoes for us. Here we have her, because she's in the Red Cross, she has certain rights that others don't have. And she says, I went to visit the young men whom the Germans took for forced labor. Every Jew age 18 to 28 had to go. Being a worker for the Red Cross, I had an entrance pass. The fellows were eating cabbage boiled in water. It had neither taste nor salt. Let us drink to the health of these young men who are suffering without complaining. And it's very interesting that because everyone knew that Bouena had access, they would come. They would come to her house. She writes about it, how they would, as soon as she came back, all the mothers and wives would come running and begging her for information about their sons, about their husbands, what is the situation. And she wrote many coplas about how her heart was broken because she knew that some of them had been beaten, some of them had died, and she didn't really want to be the bearer of so much bad news. but she continued to work. So we see that on one hand, she is working for the community and trying to get information for them because she has the access, and at the same time trying to help with the children in providing food for them. Now here we get the entrance to the arch enemy, I'd say, of Buenas and also of the community. Papa Naum was one of the Greek leaders, and he befriended Hasson. Hasson was a Jew who was chosen to be the head of the Jewish police force, so to speak, and he was a horrible human being. And you can see, she even says, everyone says, what is this anti-Semite doing with a Jew? What is Papa Naum doing with him? They're making plans together for the deportation of the Jews. So word has gotten out that they're planning to support the Jews. They have set up various ghettos within Salonika. They have moved people from place to place. Buena herself is already extremely wary of what's going to happen, and she actually goes to the head rabbi and says, I have Greek friends and now on the other side of the city, and I would like to take some babies and save them because I have a very bad feeling about what's going to happen here. And she requests help from him. He refuses. Despite that, she actually, on her own, takes some infants from families that she knew, and she brought them over the fence to Greek Catholic friends who she had, who many of them saved these children, and after the war, she actually went back and saved a few of them, and brought a few of them from the monasteries where they had been put. So she is concerned that they're making plans together for the deportation of the Jews and to take all the belongings of these unfortunates. We hope that they are not going to succeed because Salonika is a city of miracles. Let us drink to the health of those who believe that we are going to live. So you can see, I mean, granted, she wrote these coplas after she had left, after she had actually survived, and we'll see how she survives, but she survives and comes to Israel for a while, to Palestine, and then ends up in Montreal, which makes sense for a French speaker. Her husband had relatives there when she does get married. At any rate, we have already this Hasson figure here who plays such a huge part in the future of the Jewish community because he is the one who prepares all the lists. His sister worked for the Jewish community, and he got from her the names and addresses and incomes of everyone. And while he was giving information to the Germans, he was also making a lot of arrangements for himself. He was stealing as much as he possibly could and putting everything he had stolen into suitcases. He was planning his own escape because he knew there was going to be a deportation. But here, and here she says, everyone is afraid to talk. There seem to be Jewish police everywhere. The only thing they say is, and here we have, boca cerrada non entra mochka. Flies don't enter closed mouths. So the less you say, the better off you are, because they really had no idea what awaited them. Let us drink to the health of those who close their mouths. And we know that, let me just see that that Buena is getting very, very nervous about what is going on. She then hears that the women are not coming on a particular morning. This is March. She is waiting for them to come and get all the milk that she has prepared for the babies. She turns to the head of the Red Cross, and he says, "You know what? Most of those women, the poor women, have been moved to the Baron Hirsch ghetto, which is right by the railroad tracks, and that was precisely from where they were going to be sending all of the Jews. That they moved them eventually from ghetto to ghetto. There were 3 or 4 of them, and they would get to the Baron Hirsch ghetto, and she got permission. Not only permission, but a Red Cross car, and filled it with the milk. She was worried about these babies going hungry. And so she crosses over, and when she gets to the Baron Hirsch ghetto, she sees that there is barbed wire there, and that's when her heart sinks, and she realizes that this is as terrible as she had imagined. She goes in there, and who is there but none other than Hassan. And Hassan sees her and is infuriated that she had the nerve, that she had the chutzpah to come into the ghetto when it has been closed off. And he proceeds to take the milk out and pour it down her throat until she literally she vomits. And she writes about this. She also wrote memoirs, and she mentions this and how he had tortured her. And when she finally gets out of there, and she was afraid she wasn't going to get out of there alive, she goes out, and she thinks, I think that my life is in danger because Hassan hates her so deeply and is so anxious to be rid of her in any way that he possibly could. And so her friends come and say, don't go to sleep in your house tonight. It's we're very worried about it. They put her up somewhere else, and she makes arrangements for her fiance who had just returned from the Greek army. And they had decided that they would get married the next morning so that they could travel together and escape together as a married couple. And the deal was that they would come to the synagogue, one of the synagogues, and when she shows up in the morning, her fiancé had been shot and dead. We assume that it was either Hassan who had shot him or had sent someone to shoot him as a punishment for her for interfering and for going too far. And she realizes this is just, she's got to get out of there. She turns around and she's arrested. Bouena is put into into jail. It's the Pavlos Melas jail, which I actually went to see when I was in Salonika. There are still signs there saying, do not take pictures, no signs, whatever. I did get a picture out of there. And she is there, but her friends know that she is there and are thinking, how are we going to get her out? We've got to get Bouena out. Bouena, among other things, in her family, they were extremely talented seamstresses and embroiderers, and made many beautiful items. And she kept talking to her because she knew Greek, which was unusual because many of the Salonican Jews only knew Ladino and some French if they went to the Alliance school, which is where she went and why her French was so wonderful. And she kept speaking to her female jailer, who was a Greek woman, and she thought, how am I going to manage to figure out how to let people know where I am? So her idea was actually quite successful. She told the jailer, there is a fabulous tailor shop, and if you want to get something beautiful, I really suggest you go there on your day off. And she was purposely doing this so that they would realize how would this Greek soldier possibly know about a tailor store, that it had to be through Bouena, and it succeeded. She went and she inquired to get something, and her friends, some of whom were partisans, realized where Bouena was. They managed to steal soldiers' uniforms, and they actually broke into the prison and got her out, which was quite a feat. I think we could make a movie about Buena's life when you hear some of the other things that she also did. And she hides. She gets in touch with the Italian consul, who agrees to give her an Italian passport and a name, Flora. She gets a pseudonym, and she wants to join the partisans. And it's also extremely interesting because it was very rare for the Salonican Jews to join the partisans for quite a few reasons. I mean, first of all, they were the first community that the Germans had taken over in Greece, and they had created these ghettos, and they were really under fairly tight security. Second of all, I already intimated that many of them did not know Greece. So the older generation, for sure, and even a lot of the younger people did not know Greek. So you cannot join the Greek partisans if you don't have the language facility. Also, the partisans were organized in the south, near Athens, and that's far away. Salonika is in the northeast, in the mountainous area. So with the Germans slowly moving into other areas in northern Greece, it is extremely, extremely dangerous to consider doing this. And the last reason that I have discovered from my research that young people opted not to leave was because the families were so tight that they didn't want to abandon their parents or their elders. Buena has no choice at this point because Hassan is after her, and she knows she's got to get out. As I said, the Italian consul, he provided a number of Jews false passports in order to flee. The arrangements are made for her to come to the railroad station. When she gets to the railroad station, she gets there with a few of her cohorts behind her who actually were armed, who came in order to protect her. And Hassan is there, and he recognizes her. And she writes a copla about this, where she sees him, and she uses she basically used a term that she thought that she was going to have an accident, that she was going to lose it, but she realized that Hassan was going to think twice about it because her friends had guns and they might actually consider shooting him. So she miraculously gets onto the train, and the train goes to the middle of nowhere, basically, not as far as Athens, in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night, and she is met by someone. She has to walk to another train station where she manages to go to Athens, and time after time she truly faces she faces dangers that it is amazing that she survived. For example, she dresses in Greek. They give her the dress of a Greek woman who comes from the villages, and she's sitting in a coffee house there, waiting to get instructions about where she should go, and the German guards come by, and she again is just amazed that she sort of gets away with it. But I will get back to her. Let's see what's happening in Salonika. And here she talks about those who are being departed, and she says she actually this is one about the ones who return. So she was not there for the deportations because she fled, but she knew about it and heard about it. Vis-a-vis her family, it's also extremely interesting that she had two sisters who were not in Salonika. One had gone off to Nice in France, and one had come to Palestine. But and her father had already passed away. Her older brother Eli was in charge of the family, and he had given their property to various friends. He had actually distributed it to various families and whatnot because he thought that was safer. He was sent to Auschwitz along with her grandmother, her aunts, her other sisters. He was the only brother, and none of them survive. But she finds out from others about what had happened, so that she is able to, discuss the various deportations. But those who like, okay. The fate of Bouena is so different from anyone else. Again, as I said, being unusual, having joined the partisans as a Salonican and as a woman there. But she's brave, and she's anxious to do anything she can possibly do. She actually serves as a cook on a Greek ship for a little while, so where there were Nazis, and she gives information about them. She also, at one point, she talks about how she and a couple of the other partisans were hiding, and the Germans were on their tail. And she says how she had actually gone out outside to relieve herself, and the Germans had captured all the other partisans, and that's how she and another partisan actually managed to survive. And she wrote in her memoirs many details about what she did, including finding Jewish children who were abandoned, who when the Nazis do come to Athens, they do roundups, and she finds a woman who was killed and the baby was lying there, and she manages also to find a wet nurse for her. She gathers quite a few children and negotiates with a fisherman to get a very small boat so that they could get out of Greece. As they are leaving, the Nazis are shooting at them, but they actually manage to get from there to another island, and from there to Syria. Which none of us would go to these days, but in the 40s it seemed like it was the best option for her. She's taking care of this baby. She is taking care of other children, and also, ironically, then she gets a boat from Syria to Palestine, and they enter through Gaza. And she manages to find families for all of these children because she knew that there was a Greek community in Tel Aviv, in the area of Tel Aviv, and sent out the word for anyone who could take care of them. She makes all of these arrangements, and then she returns to Greece when the war is over. She returns with the United Nations Relief Association. She is supposedly a dietitian in a DP camp, and this is where she talks about what happens about the deportees, because they want her there. Since she can speak to them as a Ladino speaker, they desperately needed her there. So she says, here, the deportees begin to arrive in Salonika in small numbers, with numbers on their arms, obviously with the numbers that were the Nazis put on their arms, that Haman tattooed on them. Now, I have to make a comment here. She got a little bit bitter here because she felt that the UN and also the Joint, everyone was doing as much as they possibly could to save and help them. And she says it seemed to them they would be received with tambourines and trumpets. And it was as though they thought that there was going to be major fanfare. But the few who survived and had hidden themselves were bitter about what had happened. She says the deportees were united together, and they looked at us as if we were anti-Semites. So she was deeply hurt by the fact that there she was, one of them, and she did not have an easy survival at all. And the joint had brought food and clothing for them, and she said they took what they wanted from the joint. They knew how to fight and use the whip. This is just an expression in Ladino. In other words, that they were much more aggressive than she had expected. And then the preparations were made for them to go to the land of Israel. So they had the training course, which I will say sort of numerously. If you look here, I wrote, es solo cuando se fueron a Palestina con la achshara, which was a word that took me a month or so to figure out, because the Spanish speakers and Ladino speakers don't have an H, they don't have a hey, and her handwriting was not always the easiest to read. Her letters were sort of loopy and spread apart, and I actually thought it was a Japanese word like aki shara or whatnot, and I had a number of Ladino native speakers helping me when I was transcribing and translating all of her coplas, and then nobody could figure out what this was, because everybody forgot that it might be a non-Ladino word, namely Hebrew word. Put an H in front of that, and you've got a Hebrew word of hachshara, which is, as we see here, is the training that they got, the training course that they are willing to work in order to make a new life. But she does point out that many of them came with tuberculosis. The joint viewed them compassionately. Let us drink to the health of these embittered souls. She spent quite a lot of time in Salonika when the war was over, first as working with UNRWA and trying to help with them. Then she actually went back to look for her home, and she knew that as I mentioned, her brother had deposited many money as well as many of their belongings with various people. She bumped into the banker that they dealt with in the street, and she said, "Look, I know you've got money from my brother," and he denied it, completely denied it. His wife came walking along, and his wife was carrying this beautiful purse that her aunt had embroidered. And she looked at him and she said, "You know as well as I do that our family has a unique way of embroidering things, and my aunt did this." And he turns to his wife and he says, "Hand it over." But she was not terribly successful in getting very much back. She also had prepared, as was done in the Sephardi tradition, she had prepared her dowry, and this, since they were so amazingly talented at sewing and whatnot, everything was hand done. We're talking about sheets and towels and even mattresses. They collected the goose feathers, and they dried them, and they put them out in the courtyard and dried them, and then they sewed them into the cover for their mattresses and pillows and you name it. And somehow she found out where her entire dowry, her entire trousseau was being held. And it was at some place a little bit out in the country, and she goes out there, and this woman sees her and sicks the dog on her, realizing that what had happened. Fortunately fortunately for the moment, for Bouena, the husband showed up and told the wife, no, let her see what's there. And she realizes that the things were big and she had nowhere to take them to because she had no home anymore. So her heart is completely broken. She takes a few things and she goes back and she really sort of goes into a state of depression. But as I said, she did manage to find this little girl, Salonika, who was in a monastery, and it was traumatic and very difficult for her because she didn't remember anything and didn't remember, and was already doing Catholic prayers. But she does take her out. In the meantime, some other major events happen. Joining her when she was working at the DP camp was a fellow from a fellow from Israel who had been sent, and he was the quartermaster, and he was working with her, and they hit it off together, and they consider the possibility of getting married. He himself was a Ukrainian survivor whose he and his brother had hidden in a ditch, and his parents had been killed in a pogrom. The two of them managed to get to Canada, which is why he will have a sister living in Canada, but he decides that he's a Zionist, and he comes and he joins a kibbutz in Israel, and he's trying to help her as best he can. She is also roaming. She's roaming around the streets, and here she writes, I went to Salonika after the war with the UN Relief Association. On every street in the winter, they sell chestnuts. I bought a few. And then she has the shock of her life. The chestnuts were given to me in paper that was my mother's Haggadah. She recognized that they had ransacked the house, and that there they were wrapping up chestnuts on the street, and she went into a frenzy, and she bought all the papers that the vendor had. I told him that you, plural, did this to the books from the Jewish Quarter. I'm not sure the vendor really cared, but it was extremely, extremely traumatic for her, going from place to place and seeing the destruction. Not only had the Jewish cemetery been completely destroyed and given over for building the university, but the city and the homes and the belongings and their, and their personal items, from the pocketbook to her trousseau to the Haggadah. This was really quite terrible. But Bouena was strong. She was an incredibly strong woman. And she then started working with the Joint as well. And in addition to the survivors who had been in the camps, who had come out of Auschwitz, there were also a number of younger people who had hidden in the mountains, who had survived by hiding in the mountains. And they come and they come into the city, and they realize that they have no families. They have no homes and no families. But many of them had apparently, sort of partnered off, and they said, we'd like to get married, but we have no families, and we have no bridal dresses, and we have, how are we going to do this? Well, leave it to Bouena. On April 7th, 1946, she organizes a group wedding. And this building is in the Matanot LeEvyonim, where she was the Jewish community building for giving donations to the poor, and where she had worked and giving out the powdered milk. And here we have, look how many couples we have who came back, and she said, get married together. You'll all be each other's family. And they agreed. She sewed the dresses. She got fabric from the Joint, and she sewed the dresses. She baked cakes for them. She went into the building and she baked cakes for them. And the arrow I put there is because Bouena is the only one without a wedding dress, and she's there. And I have a sort of funny story about that, because when I went to Salonika to, among other things, to take photos for my book, and there is a small Jewish museum there, and I had been in contact with the head of the museum before I came, also because her partner was one of my Ladino experts, and when I came in there, I knew she'd written about this wedding, and I looked at this picture, and I walked out, and then I said, maybe she was there, and this was the last picture I saw in the museum, and I walked out, and I came back, and I walked out, and I came back, and then I found her, and I immediately wrote to her son, Eli, who was in Canada, in Ottawa, and I said, Eli, I found this picture with your mom, and the museum, within 10 minutes, they sent me this photo so that I could send it off to Eli. And I had met Eli. He had come to Israel, and I had had dinner with him, and we talked about it. And I said, Eli, I recognize it because you have the same eyes as your mom, and I picked her out. So she organized this amazing, amazing wedding. And then in July, she gets married to Max Garfinkel, and they go and they move to Israel. They move to Ein HaShofet, which is the kibbutz that he was at. The community was not, the women in the kibbutz were not thrilled about this, because he was one of the eligible bachelors, and here he came back with this not Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Greek and Ladino and French-speaking woman, and she was actually quite miserable, and she writes about it. And she convinces him to go to Montreal because she cannot handle the life in the kibbutz there. And while she is in Montreal, she sits down and she starts writing. She writes her memoirs in Ladino, and she writes. She recorded songs. She had an amazing memory. She recorded hundreds and hundreds of songs and romances in Ladino. Many are at the Phonotech Institute of the Hebrew at the National Museum, because they were unknown. She didn't have the greatest voice, but she remembered so many of these romances and all kinds of expressions, which she gave me, which I actually gave to a doctoral student at Bar Ilan, and half of her doctorate was on these different expressions in Ladino that Bouena had remembered, and she wrote as well these coplas. So the obstacles that Bouena Sarfatty faced are so many. On a personal level, just that encounter with Chasson, which literally chased her through her entire life. I will just tell you that Chasson fled he got special permission, he got a car, he took his wife and his lover, his mistress, and tons of gold and money, and he fled to Albania. He was actually arrested, fled the prison, and then was found later again and arrested, and he was tried, and she was at the trial. She did not testify because she fainted when she got there, but he was found guilty, and he was executed. So her encounters with him, being taken to prison, having to escape the prison, seeing him at the station, as a partisan, fleeing the Nazis right and left, saving the children, getting into that boat to get out to Greece, going through Syria and Gaza, with facing the fact that her community was lost. 95% of Salonican Jews were killed during the Holocaust, and this was the largest community in Greece. It was the largest community. She was incredibly unique, as I pointed out. There were no women partisans, there were no Salonican partisans, there were no women who were writing and recording the past as she did, listing names at the end of the coplas, doing a service to the community. leaving her Sephardic world, which was so difficult, going through Israel and then in Montreal. And she was not comfortable in Montreal, even though she was happy about being in a French-speaking place. She felt very discriminated against as a Sephardi Jew. She had her traditions, and they gave her a hard time there. She faced other obstacles. She gave birth to a daughter who died at age year in 1955. Poor Max here developed Parkinson's in the 50s, and she took care of him, and he actually lived longer than she did. She was born in 1916 and died in 1997. He lived 2 years more than she did. But she writes in her last copla, "It was not easy for me to remember and to write of the past, things that I want to forget. I thank Linda and Eli who encouraged me and who were interested in the history of Salonika." And she maintains amazing ties to her past, to her personal past and to the community's past, through music, through her memory, through Ladino, through her Mama Loshen there. It was my honor and my privilege to have gotten from her this collection, of which I had to think for a long time about what to do with it, and to translate it, and to put it all into I'm an historian, put it into an historical perspective. But I did manage to come out with the book, An Ode to Salonika, which got Canadian National Jewish Canadian Prize because she was from Canada. And I should also point out that the background of this book, which I think that Indiana University Press did a fabulous job, this was Buena's embroidery, her personal embroidery that her son Eli sent to me before he passed away from cancer. So it was my honor and privilege to enable all of us to remember her and to memorialize Salonika. Thank you.